a horse discovered a wounded Apache woman and led his cowboy to a life-changing fate. The sun hung low over the wide, open plains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The wind whispered through the tall grass, carrying the scent of earth and distant wildflowers. Jake Thornton, a lean and rugged cowboy, rode slowly across the prairie, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of trouble. He had been guiding his small herd of cattle through the region for days, moving from one patch of fresh grass to another, always mindful of predators and rustlers. His horse, Shadow, a dark bay stallion with eyes that seemed almost human in their intelligence, walked steadily beside him, ears twitching with each sound in the distance. Jake had been riding for as long as he could remember. Life on the plains was not easy, but it was honest. He knew how to read the weather, how to find water in dry land, and how to calm a spooked horse. He had learned long ago that a cowboy's best friend was not another person, but the horse that shared his journey. And Shadow was more than just a horse. He was a companion, a protector, and sometimes, it seemed, a guide. The day had been hot, the sun relentless, and Jake felt the weight of his hat pressing down on his forehead. Sweat ran down his face, stinging his eyes, but he did not stop. He had a schedule to keep, cattle to move, and a reputation to maintain. Yet, even in his routine, something felt different. Shadow was uneasy. The horse's ears twitched constantly, and he would occasionally stop and snort, stamping his hooves on the dry ground. Jake frowned and patted Shadow's neck. "Easy there, boy." "It's just the wind," Jake said, trying to calm the animal, though deep down he trusted Shadow's instincts more than his own. They continued along the dusty trail, the cattle moving lazily behind them. The plains stretched endlessly in every direction, hills rolling gently under the fading light. Jake's mind wandered as he guided the herd, thinking about the small cabin where he would rest that night, a meal of beans and bread waiting for him. He liked the simplicity of it, the quiet life that allowed him to think and be alone with his thoughts. But Shadow was not interested in quiet. The horse's attention was fixed on something ahead, something invisible to Jake. Shadow slowed, then stopped completely, nostrils flaring as he sniffed the air. His ears turned sharply, listening to a sound that Jake could not hear. "What is it, boy?" Jake asked, his hand moving to the reins. He squinted toward the hills ahead, but all he saw was the golden grass swaying in the breeze. Shadow let out a soft whinny and took a few steps forward, then stopped again, pawing at the ground. Jake felt a chill run down his spine, though the air was still warm. There was no reason for fear, not yet, but something about the way Shadow was behaving made him uneasy. He decided to follow the horse's lead. After all, Shadow had saved him more than once, sensing danger long before Jake could. As they approached a narrow canyon carved into the side of a hill, Shadow suddenly bolted, moving with surprising speed for a horse that had been walking calmly just moments before. Jake tightened his grip on the reins and urged the cattle to keep pace behind him. The canyon walls rose high on either side, shadows stretching across the rocky ground. The air smelled different here, sharper, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Then Jake saw her. At first, she was just a figure lying in the dust, but as he drew closer, his heart tightened. It was a woman, her clothing torn, her hair matted with dirt and blood. She was barely moving, and small, shallow breaths escaped her lips. Jake's instincts screamed at him to approach with caution. Stories of ambushes and danger were always in a cowboy's mind, but the sight of her, hurt, alone, and helpless, overpowered his fear. Shadow neighed softly and lowered his head toward her, as if urging Jake to help. Jake dismounted quickly, his boots crunching on the loose stones. He knelt beside her, careful not to startle her. "Hey, can you hear me?" he asked gently. His voice was calm, steady. The woman's eyes fluttered open, dark and wary. She studied him for a long moment, suspicion in her gaze, but also a glimmer of hope. Jake quickly assessed her injuries. There were shallow cuts on her arm and shoulder, dried blood around a small puncture wound. She was weak, likely from blood loss and exhaustion. He reached into his pack and pulled out a clean cloth, wetting it with water he had carried in a small canteen. Carefully, he began to clean her wounds, all the while keeping an eye on the surroundings.
"My name's Jake," he said softly.
"I'm not going to hurt you. You're safe now." The woman did not respond immediately. She winced as he cleaned the wound, and her hand instinctively moved to push his away. But then she stopped. Jake could see the pain in her eyes, but also a strength that refused to be broken. He worked quickly but gently, doing what he could to ease her suffering. Shadow stayed close, his presence reassuring, nuzzling her shoulder once, as if to say, "You're not alone." Once he finished tending to the wound, Jake lifted a small blanket from his pack and draped it over her. She shivered, though not from cold. The fear in her eyes slowly softened, replaced by cautious trust. "Can you stand?" Jake asked after a moment. The woman shook her head weakly, unable to rise. Jake's brow furrowed. They were far from any settlement, and he knew it would take careful planning to get her to safety. Shadow snorted and pawed at the ground, looking between Jake and the woman. It was as if the horse understood that the next step was critical. Jake took a deep breath, steadying himself. "All right, boy," he said, glancing at Shadow. "Looks like it's just us. Let's get her out of here." With great care, Jake lifted the woman onto Shadow's back, supporting her as best he could. She held on loosely, still wary, but allowing him to guide her. Shadow moved slowly at first, adjusting to her weight, then began to walk steadily down the canyon path. Jake walked beside them, leading Shadow by the reins, eyes constantly scanning the rugged terrain for any signs of danger. As they moved, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the land. The wind carried the faint cries of distant birds, and the canyon seemed to stretch endlessly. Jake felt a mix of fear and determination. He knew the journey ahead would not be easy, but something about the woman's presence, her quiet strength, and Shadow's unyielding loyalty filled him with resolve. Hours passed, and the canyon began to open into a wider valley. Jake guided Shadow carefully, making sure the woman remained balanced. She did not speak, but occasionally her hand would brush against his arm, a silent acknowledgement of trust. The bond between man, horse, and woman was growing, unspoken but undeniable. Night began to fall, and the temperature dropped. Jake found a small, sheltered spot near a rock formation where they could rest safely. He helped the woman down from Shadow, covering her with the blanket again, and gave Shadow a quick pat before letting him graze nearby. As he sat beside the woman, watching the stars appear one by one in the vast night sky, Jake felt a strange sense of destiny. He had always thought his life would be simple, marked by cattle drives and quiet nights, but now, with Shadow beside him and the injured woman in his care, he realized that fate had other plans. Somewhere deep in the plains, in the quiet of the night, 3 lives had crossed paths in a way that would change them all. The horse had sensed danger, the woman had survived against odds, and Jake had chosen to follow instinct over caution. What lay ahead was uncertain, But for the first time in a long while, Jake felt that he was exactly where he needed to be. Morning came slowly over the plains. The first rays of sunlight spilled across the valley, glinting off the rocks and casting a soft glow over the golden grass. Jake Thornton was already awake, sitting quietly beside the small fire he had managed to keep alive through the night. Shadow grazed nearby, ears flicking at every sound, his dark eyes alert, even in the gentle morning light. The injured woman, still wrapped in the blanket, stirred slightly, her breathing steadier than it had been the night before. Jake had not yet learned her name. He had thought about asking, but he also knew that trust could not be rushed. She had survived this long through caution, strength, and skill, and he needed to respect that. Instead, he focused on preparing a simple breakfast of bread and dried meat while keeping an eye on her. Shadow occasionally nudged her gently, as if checking that she was all right, and Jake smiled. He had seen horses with sharp instincts before, but Shadow seemed almost human in his care for her. "Morning," Jake said softly, not expecting an answer. "You sleep all right?" The woman stirred again and slowly opened her eyes. She studied him, her gaze wary but calm, and then she nodded just slightly. Jake interpreted this as permission to continue. He tore a piece of bread and offered it to her. At first, she hesitated, but hunger overcame caution, and she took it, chewing carefully. Her movements were deliberate, careful, as if every motion had a reason behind it. Jake kept his tone gentle, speaking as though every word mattered. "I promise, Shadow won't let anything happen to you." The woman's lips curved into the barest hint of a smile, fleeting but genuine. Jake felt a warmth in his chest he had not expected. It was strange to feel such connection so quickly, but the plains had a way of creating bonds out of necessity. They were all alone here, and survival depended on trust, no matter how cautious or slow. Once she had eaten, Jake began to prepare for the journey ahead. He knew they could not stay in the valley. It was too exposed. Bandits and wild animals could find them easily, and the plains offered little protection. Carefully, he lifted the woman onto Shadow's back again, supporting her as best he could. She held on lightly, still cautious, but she no longer resisted. Shadow walked steadily down the trail, his hooves crunching softly on the dry ground. As they moved, the woman finally spoke, her voice quiet but clear. "Thank you," she said. The words were simple, but Jake felt the weight behind them. It was not just gratitude, it was recognition, trust forming between them. Jake nodded. "Don't mention it. Just hold on tight and we'll get you somewhere safe." Her eyes, dark and alert, studied him. "Safe? Where?" she asked. Jake shrugged, knowing there were no guarantees in the wild. "Somewhere people can help. Someplace where you won't get hurt again." The woman said nothing more, but her silence did not feel cold. It felt thoughtful, as though she was considering whether she could believe him. Shadow, as if sensing the unspoken tension, moved with steady confidence, guiding them through a narrow trail that wound along a small stream. The water reflected the morning sun, sparkling like diamonds in the shallow current. Birds called from the trees, their songs bright and lively, contrasting sharply with the quiet urgency of the journey. Hours passed, and the terrain grew more challenging. Rocky outcroppings forced Jake to guide Shadow carefully, ensuring the woman remained balanced. He could feel her tension, her muscles stiff with pain and fatigue, and he offered words of encouragement. "You're doing fine. Just a little farther," he said. "We'll take a break soon." Finally, they reached a small grove of trees beside the stream. The shade was welcome, and Jake helped the woman down from Shadow's back. He led her to a flat rock where she could sit comfortably. Shadow grazed nearby, ears twitching, always alert. Jake knelt beside her and examined the wound on her shoulder again. It looked better than the night before, but he knew it would take time to heal fully. "I need to make sure this doesn't get infected," Jake said, reaching into his pack for more cloth and clean water. The woman flinched slightly but allowed him to work. Jake's movements were careful, practiced. He cleaned the wound gently and bandaged it securely. Shadow stood nearby, watching, as if supervising. When he finished, Jake leaned back and let out a deep breath. "There. That should help. You'll be sore, but it will get better." The woman nodded, studying him. I am Ayana," she said finally, the name rolling softly off her tongue. Jake smiled. "Ayana, that's a good name." He hesitated, then added, "I'm Jake." They sat in silence for a moment, letting the sounds of the grove fill the space. The wind rustled through the leaves, and the stream bubbled softly beside them. Even in the wild there was a sense of peace, a momentary pause from the dangers that surrounded them. Eventually, Ayana spoke again, her voice quieter this time. I was attacked by men." She swallowed hard. "They took everything. My family, my home." Jake listened without interrupting, letting her tell as much as she felt ready to share. Her story was fragmented, but the meaning was clear. She had survived against odds that would have broken many others. He felt respect for her strength and a deeper sense of responsibility to ensure she survived now. "I'm sorry," Jake said finally. "I can't imagine, but we'll make sure you're safe from now on. You won't have to face that again." Ayana's eyes met his, searching for honesty, and Jake saw a flicker of relief. Trust was not given freely in her world, and the fact that she allowed him to care for her spoke volumes. They spent the next few hours resting, letting Shadow graze and drinking from the stream. Jake shared some of his food with her, simple bread and dried meat, and she ate more freely now, the tension in her body slowly easing. Shadow occasionally nuzzled her gently, and she laughed quietly for the first time, the sound light and musical, a contrast to the heavy emotions of the day before. As the sun climbed higher, Jake knew it was time to move again. They could not stay in one place too long. Safety was temporary on the open plains. He helped Ayana back onto Shadow, supporting her carefully. She trusted him enough now to let him guide her, and the horse moved confidently, as if understanding the importance of the journey. The trail ahead was long and uncertain. They navigated hills and valleys, careful to avoid areas that looked dangerous. Jake kept a constant watch for signs of trouble, listening to the sounds of the land, reading the patterns of wildlife, and trusting Shadow's instincts. The horse led them through hidden paths and across small streams, always alert, always protective. During the journey, Ayana began to speak more. She told him fragments of her life, her family, her village, the customs she had grown up with. Jake listened closely, asking gentle questions, never pushing for more than she was ready to share. He learned to see the world from her perspective, to understand the pain and resilience that shaped her. By mid-afternoon, they reached a small rise that offered a view of the surrounding plains. Jake paused, taking in the sight. The land stretched endlessly, golden grass swaying under the wind, mountains rising in the distance. It was beautiful, harsh, and unforgiving all at once. He felt a sense of awe and respect for the world he lived in, and for the courage of the woman who had survived it. "Look at that," he said softly to Ayana. That's what we're walking through. Big, open, and dangerous, but beautiful too. Ayana looked out at the plains, her expression thoughtful. It is beautiful, she said, and dangerous. Jake nodded.
Exactly. And we'll make sure we stay safe in it. Shadow neighed softly, as if agreeing.
The bond between man, horse, and woman had grown stronger, built on trust, respect, and shared hardship. Jake felt a deep sense of connection to both of them, a realization that this journey was changing him as much as it was saving Ayana. As the sun began to lower, casting long shadows across the land, Jake guided them toward a cluster of trees that promised shelter for the night. The journey was far from over, but he knew that together they could face whatever came next. Shadow led confidently, Ayana holding on, and Jake walking beside them, ready for whatever challenges awaited. For the first time, Jake realized that the plains were not just a place of work and survival. They were a place of connection, of trust, and of life-changing encounters. And in the midst of it all, he felt a quiet certainty. Their paths had crossed for a reason, and the story that had begun with danger was only just beginning to unfold. The sun was high in the sky as Jake Thornton led Shadow and Ayana along a narrow, winding path through the plains. The heat pressed down on them, making the dust rise with each step, and the wind carried the faint scent of wildflowers mixed with dry earth. Shadow's hooves crunched against the hard soil, steady and sure, while Jake scanned the horizon constantly, his hand ready on the reins, his eyes sharp for any sign of danger. Ayana sat carefully on Shadow's back, still cautious but moving more confidently than before. The silence of the plains was heavy, but not empty. Birds called in the distance, the stream from the morning had dried into a small trickle, and the occasional rustle of grass hinted at hidden wildlife. Every so often, Shadow would pause, nostrils flaring and ears swiveling, alert to sounds too faint for Jake to hear. Jake trusted the horse completely. Shadow had never led him wrong. Ayana finally spoke, her voice soft and cautious. "How far is this place you are taking me?" Jake glanced at her, meeting her dark eyes. "It's hard to say," he admitted. "There are no roads out here, just trails and open land, but it's a safe place. People there can help you." She nodded, her hands tightening slightly on Shadow's mane. "I've been on my own for so long," she said quietly. "I forgot what it was like to trust someone." Jake's chest tightened. He understood completely. Out here in the wild, trust was earned slowly, often with sweat, patience, and careful observation. But Shadow had sensed her need for help, and Jake had followed. And now, step by step, trust was growing between them. The day stretched on. Shadows moved slowly across the ground as the sun climbed towards its peak. Jake kept a steady pace, stopping only occasionally to let Shadow rest or drink from hidden pools of water he knew would appear along the path. Ayana's strength had returned somewhat, but she still winced occasionally when Shadow shifted his weight, or when Jake adjusted the pack she carried lightly on her back. During one stop, Jake crouched down to refill his canteen at a small creek. Ayana followed slowly, carefully balancing herself on uneven stones. She crouched beside him, dipping her hands into the water and cupping it to drink. The water was cool and refreshing, and for the first time since Jake had found her, she allowed herself a small smile. "Thank you," she said again, softly. Jake nodded, offering no words this time, letting the moment speak for itself. Shadow neighed softly as if acknowledging her gratitude. The journey was not without challenges. As the day wore on, the terrain became more difficult. Rocky ridges forced Jake to lead Shadow carefully, one hoof at a time. Loose stones shifted under their weight, threatening to send them tumbling. At one point, a sudden rustle in the grass made Shadow snort and rear slightly. Jake held him steady, looking toward the sound. A small herd of deer had darted across the path, fleeing from some unseen danger. Shadow calmed after a moment, and Jake exhaled, grateful it was only wildlife. Ayana's eyes were wide with both fear and wonder. "This land is, alive," she said.
"I can feel it." Jake nodded, smiling faintly. "It is. You learn to read it if you spend enough time here. The wind, the grass, the animals, they all tell you something if you listen." They continued through valleys and across small hills, traveling mostly in silence, each lost in thought. Jake's mind wandered to the stories he had heard as a boy, the dangers of the plains, the hardships of life for settlers and native tribes alike, and the countless untold stories of survival. He thought of Ayana, and how her courage reminded him of the stories, but also made them real in a way he had never experienced. Hours passed, and the sun began to lean toward the western horizon. The shadows grew long, stretching across the plains and giving the land a golden glow. Jake knew they needed shelter soon. He scanned the area ahead and spotted a line of trees near a small rise. It wasn't much, but it would provide shade and some protection from any predators or unwelcome visitors. As they approached the trees, a sudden sound froze Jake in his tracks. Footsteps, soft, deliberate, echoed faintly from the hills nearby. He signaled to Shadow, who stopped immediately, nostrils flaring. Ayana felt the tension and gripped the horse tighter. "Stay calm," Jake whispered. "We'll see who it is." They moved cautiously toward a slight bend in the path, where the grass dipped low. Through the sway of tall stalks, Jake could make out the figures of two men. They were far enough away not to notice them immediately, but their posture suggested they were not friendly travelers. Jake's heart quickened, and he instinctively shifted in front of Ayana, positioning Shadow between her and any potential danger. He studied the men carefully. They were armed, likely looking for travelers or anyone who might be vulnerable. Jake knew he had to act carefully. Shadow was alert and ready, but one wrong move could startle the men and lead to trouble. "They won't see us if we stay low," Jake whispered to Ayana. "Keep your head down and don't make a sound." She nodded, her face pale but determined. Shadow stayed perfectly still, sensing Jake's tension and matching it. Step by step, Jake guided them along the edge of the grass, using every rock and bush for cover. The men passed by without noticing them, talking quietly about some unknown business. Once they were out of sight, Jake exhaled slowly, feeling the tension drain from his body. "That was close," Ayana said quietly, gripping the horse's mane. Jake nodded. "Too close. Out here you learn to pay attention to every sound, every movement. That's how you survive." Night fell slowly, and the stars began to sparkle in the clear sky. Jake found a small, sheltered area beneath a rocky overhang. It wasn't much, but it offered some protection from wind and the cool night air. He helped Ayana down from Shadow, ensuring she was comfortable and safe. Shadow nuzzled her gently, and she leaned into the touch, a rare display of trust. Jake tended to her wound again, cleaning it carefully and making sure the bandage was secure. The long day had left both of them exhausted, but there was a sense of quiet accomplishment. They had survived another day on the wild plains, and the bond between them was growing stronger. They sat together, listening to the sounds of the night, the distant call of an owl, the rustle of small animals in the grass, and the soft breathing of Shadow as he grazed nearby. Jake felt a sense of peace he had not known in a long time. Out here in the wild, life was hard, but it was real.
It demanded courage, patience, and trust. And he had both now. Trust in Ayanna and in the loyal horse who had led them safely. Ayanna finally spoke, her voice quiet but filled with emotion.
You saved me.
I don't know how to repay you. Jake smiled gently.
No need to repay me. You made it this far because you didn't give up. That's enough. She looked at him, and for the first time there was no fear in her eyes, only gratitude and respect. The night stretched on, calm and quiet, a rare moment of safety in a world that was often harsh and unpredictable. Jake knew the journey ahead would be difficult. They still had miles to travel and dangers to avoid. But he also knew that together they had a chance. Shadow would guide them. Ayanna had the strength to survive, and he had the skill and determination to keep them both safe. As they settled in for the night, Jake felt a sense of purpose he had not felt before. The plains were full of stories, some tragic, some heroic. But this story, their story, was only beginning. And as the stars shone above them, man, horse, and woman rested side by side, ready for whatever challenges awaited with the coming dawn. The morning sun rose slowly over the horizon, casting warm golden light over the rolling plains. Jake Thornton stirred first as usual, careful not to wake Shadow or Ayanna. The wind carried the scent of dew-covered grass and wildflowers, and the soft rustle of leaves hinted at the quiet life hidden within the vast wilderness. For the first time in many days, Jake allowed himself to pause and enjoy the moment, though he knew the day ahead would bring more challenges. Ayanna was already awake, sitting quietly on a flat rock near the small camp. Her eyes followed Shadow as he grazed nearby, ears flicking at every sound, alert even in the calm morning. She reached out tentatively to touch his sleek, dark coat. The horse nuzzled her gently in return, and she smiled for the first time in days, a small, honest smile that carried relief, gratitude, and trust. "Morning," Jake said softly as he approached. "Sleep well?" Ayanna nodded, her dark eyes bright with alertness. "Better," she admitted. "Thanks to you and Shadow," Jake smiled faintly. "We've still got a long way to go. But today I think we'll find a place where you can rest properly, where people can help you heal." Ayanna's gaze lingered on him for a moment, thoughtful and cautious. I never thought I would meet someone like you," she said quietly, "someone who would help me without asking for anything in return." Jake shrugged, trying to hide the warmth he felt in his chest. Out here, sometimes helping is the only way to survive, and Shadow has a good sense of people. "He wouldn't have led me to you if it wasn't important." Shadow neighed softly as if agreeing with Jake, and Ayanna laughed lightly. The sound was musical, fragile, yet full of life, and Jake felt a sense of hope he hadn't realized he was missing. After a simple breakfast of bread and water, Jake helped Ayanna onto Shadow's back once more. The horse shifted easily under her weight, steady and strong, ready for the day's journey. Jake walked beside them, keeping a careful watch on the terrain ahead. He had learned over the past days that the plains were beautiful, but they were also full of hidden dangers, sudden cliffs, loose rocks, and people who would take advantage of travelers. They traveled through valleys and small hills, following a faint trail Jake had discovered years ago. The wind whispered through the tall grass, carrying the scent of pine and earth from the distant hills. Birds called overhead, their songs bright against the soft murmur of the plains. Shadow's hooves struck the ground steadily, each step measured and careful, guiding them forward with quiet confidence. As they rode, Ayanna began to speak more openly, sharing pieces of her life that she had kept hidden for so long. She told Jake about her family, the traditions of her people, and the small village where she had grown up. Her voice carried pride even as she spoke of the hardships she had faced. Jake listened carefully, fascinated by her stories and humbled by her courage. "You've survived so much," Jake said finally. "I can't imagine what you've been through." Ayana shook her head. "Surviving isn't always about strength," she said softly. "Sometimes it's about paying attention, being careful, and not giving up. Shadow, and you? You've helped me in ways I can't describe." Jake felt a lump in his throat, but he kept his tone light. "Well, I'm glad I could help, but don't forget, you're just as strong as Shadow or me. You've made it this far on your own." The day wore on, and the landscape began to change. The plains gave way to a denser area of forest, with tall trees casting cool shadows across the ground. Small animals scurried through the underbrush, and the scent of fresh water became stronger as they approached a stream that wound its way through the forest. Jake guided Shadow carefully over the uneven terrain, making sure Ayana remained balanced and comfortable. By late afternoon, they reached a small settlement hidden at the edge of the forest. It was a quiet place with a few cabins, smoke rising from chimneys, and people going about their daily work. Farmers tended to their fields, children played near the stream, and the sound of laughter drifted on the breeze. Jake could feel Ayana's tension ease as they approached the settlement. She had survived so long in fear and solitude that even the sight of others brought a mix of relief and anxiety. Jake led them to a small cabin on the edge of the settlement where an older woman lived. She greeted them with curiosity and warmth, immediately noticing Ayana's wounds. "Come inside, child," she said gently. "Double and double, no wise. We'll take care of you." Ayana hesitated for only a moment before following, allowing Jake to support her as they entered the cabin. The woman guided them to a small bed where Ayana could rest safely. Jake helped her settle in, removing the pack and adjusting her blanket to keep her comfortable. Shadow stayed just outside, his dark eyes watching over them like a guardian. Inside the cabin, Ayana finally allowed herself to relax completely. She leaned back on the bed, exhaustion and relief washing over her. Jake stayed close, making sure she had everything she needed. The older woman tended to her wound more thoroughly, cleaning and dressing it properly. The process was slow but careful, and Ayana remained still, trusting them completely for the first time. As the day turned into evening, Jake and Ayana sat together on the small porch outside the cabin. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange, pink, and purple. Shadow grazed nearby, calm and content. The three of them, in that quiet moment, formed a small circle of trust and connection. Ayana spoke softly, her voice filled with wonder. "I never thought I would find a place like this. A place where I am safe and cared for." Jake smiled. "It's not much, but it's enough. And you're not alone anymore." She looked at him, eyes shining with gratitude and emotion. You've changed my life," she said. Jake felt a warmth in his chest, the same warmth he had felt the morning he found her. "We've both changed," he said quietly. "I've learned a lot from you too, about courage and trust and seeing the world differently." The night grew cooler, and the stars appeared one by one, sparkling like tiny lanterns in the vast sky. Jake and Ayana spoke quietly about their hopes for the future. She wanted to recover fully, to regain her strength and independence, and Jake promised to help her every step of the way. Shadow remained nearby, a constant and loyal presence, never leaving their side. In the following days, Jake stayed in the settlement with Ayana, helping her regain her strength. He taught her some skills for survival and travel, sharing what he had learned from years on the plains. Ayana, in turn, shared her knowledge of the land, the plants, and the signs of danger that her people had taught her. Together they learned from each other, their bond growing stronger with every passing day. The settlement's people grew fond of Ayana as well, helping her heal and welcoming her as one of their own. Jake noticed the change in her, the way she smiled more freely, the way her eyes sparkled with curiosity, and the confidence in her movements as she walked through the small village. Shadow seemed proud too, calm and watchful, sensing that their mission was complete for now. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jake, Ayana, and Shadow stood together on a small hill overlooking the settlement. The wind carried the scent of pine and fresh earth, and the sky glowed in colors that seemed. Jake placed a hand gently on Ayana's shoulder. "We made it," he said simply. Ayana nodded, a small tear rolling down her cheek. "Yes, we did," she whispered. Jake smiled, feeling a sense of peace and accomplishment. Their journey had been difficult, full of danger and uncertainty, but it had also brought them together in a way that nothing else could. They had formed a bond of trust, courage, and friendship that would last a lifetime. As they watched the last light fade from the sky, Jake realized that life had changed for both of them. Ayana had found safety, care, and trust, while he had discovered a deeper understanding of courage, empathy, and the importance of connection. Shadow stood between them, his head lowered slightly, content and proud, as if he understood that he had played a part in something truly special. For the first time in many weeks, Jake felt that he could rest, knowing that the journey had brought them to a place where hope, safety, and healing were possible. And though they knew challenges would come again, they faced them together, with trust in each other and with Shadow guiding the way. The morning air was crisp and fresh as Jake Thornton stepped outside the small cabin where he had been staying with Ayana. The sun painted the plains in gold, and the gentle breeze carried the scent of grass, earth, and distant wildflowers. Shadow grazed quietly nearby, his dark coat shining in the sunlight, eyes alert as always. Jake took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. The journey they had begun so unexpectedly had brought him, Ayana and Shadow, to a place none of them had imagined, yet it felt right. Ayana emerged from the cabin, her movements steady and confident. Her wounds had healed almost completely, and she carried herself with a quiet strength that Jake admired. Her eyes met his, dark and full of gratitude. She smiled, a smile that held warmth, trust, and hope. "Good morning," Jake said softly. "Sleep well?" Ayana nodded. "Yes," she said, her voice calm. "I've never felt safer, Jake, or more alive." Jake smiled. "Good. Today, we can think about what comes next. You deserve to live fully, not just survive." Shadow neighed softly, as if agreeing, and Ayana laughed. It was a light, musical sound, free of fear or hesitation. Jake felt a lump in his throat. That sound, that moment, it was what he had been hoping for when he first found her, wounded and alone. For the next several days, they prepared for a small journey. Ayana wanted to visit the nearby town to gather supplies and learn more about the people she could trust. Jake would accompany her, not as a protector, but as a companion. The trust between them had grown into something unspoken but undeniable. Shadow, loyal as ever, would lead them through the plains, guiding them with the intelligence and awareness that had saved them countless times before. As they set out, Ayana spoke quietly, almost to herself. "I never thought a horse could be so wise, so brave."
Jake glanced at her and chuckled. Shadow's got more sense than most men I know.
He knows when to run, when to stand, and when to protect. Shadow snorted and pranced lightly, as if pleased by the compliment. Ayana reached down to stroke his mane, and Shadow leaned into her touch, his dark eyes calm and steady. The bond between the three of them was unspoken, strong, and real. As they rode across the plains, Jake reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The first day he had found her, wounded and frightened, he had not known what fate had in store, but Shadow had sensed her need, guiding him through the endless grasslands and hidden valleys. Ayana's courage had amazed him, and her trust had changed him. He realized that life was not just about surviving or working the land. It was about connection, understanding, and seeing the world through another's eyes. They rode quietly for hours, the vastness of the plain stretching endlessly in every direction. Small animals darted through the grass, and birds called overhead. The wind carried the sound of the distant stream, soft and calming. Ayana spoke occasionally, sharing her observations about the land, the plants, and the subtle signs of wildlife that her people had taught her to notice. Jake listened intently, learning things he had never thought about, realizing that she had survived not just through strength, but through wisdom and awareness of the world around her. By late afternoon, they reached the edge of the small town. Smoke rose from chimneys, and the soft murmur of voices carried on the breeze. Children played in the streets, farmers tended their fields, and merchants called out from their stalls. It was a world that Ayana had avoided for so long, but now she entered it with curiosity rather than fear. Jake guided them to a small shop where they could buy supplies and food. Ayana's eyes widened as she looked at the shelves lined with items she had only seen from afar before. She picked up simple things carefully, handling each item with a mixture of curiosity and reverence. Jake smiled at her quiet wonder, glad to see her exploring life beyond survival. After gathering their supplies, they stopped near the edge of town to rest. Shadow grazed nearby, and Ayana sat on the grass, her eyes thoughtful. "Jake," she said softly, I want to learn more about your world, about the people here. I want to understand it, even if it's different from mine." Jake nodded, feeling a deep sense of pride and respect for her. "And I want to understand yours," he said. "Your traditions, your ways, your stories. We've both learned from each other already, but there's still more to discover."
Ayana smiled, a small, genuine smile.
For the first time, she felt hope for the future, not just survival, but a life full of possibilities. Shadow neighed softly, and she laughed again, the sound carrying across the open fields. Over the next few weeks, Jake and Ayana worked together in the settlement, helping each other and forming strong bonds with the people around them. Ayana shared her knowledge of the land and survival skills, teaching children and neighbors how to read signs in nature, find clean water, and recognize safe plants. Jake continued his work as a cowboy, guiding cattle and helping settlers, but now he did it with a new perspective, aware of the lives and traditions of the people around him, and grateful for the lessons he had learned from Ayana. Shadow remained a constant presence, loyal and attentive. The horse had become more than a companion. He was a bridge between two worlds, between Jake and Ayana, and between trust and courage. The three of them were inseparable, each completing the other in a way that neither had expected. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant hues of orange and red, Jake, Ayana, and Shadow stood on a hill overlooking the settlement. The plain stretched out before them, endless and wild, yet filled with possibility. The wind carried the scent of grass and pine, and the distant sound of a stream added a soft, soothing melody to the scene. Ayana turned to Jake, her dark eyes reflecting the colors of the sunset. I never imagined life could be like this, she said softly. After everything, after so much fear, I feel free. I feel alive. Jake placed a hand gently on her shoulder. That's because you are alive. And because we've faced it together. You trusted me, and Shadow trusted you. That's what made all the difference. Ayanna nodded, a tear rolling down her cheek, but her smile remained. For a while, learn more, help, and just live. Jake smiled warmly. Then that's exactly what we'll do. We'll face whatever comes next together. Shadow nuzzled Ayanna gently, and she leaned into the touch, the bond between them stronger than ever. Jake watched them, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. The plains, once dangerous and lonely, had become a place of connection, courage, and hope. Their journey had begun with uncertainty, fear, and danger, but it had led them to this moment, a moment filled with trust, understanding, and life-changing growth. As the stars began to appear in the sky, Jake, Ayanna, and Shadow rode slowly back toward the settlement, their silhouettes framed by the glowing horizon. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the promise of new adventures, deeper bonds, and a life filled with meaning. For Jake, the journey had changed him completely. He had learned the value of empathy, patience, and seeing the world from another perspective. For Ayanna, the journey had given her safety, trust, and the possibility of a future she had never dared to imagine. And for Shadow, the journey had proven once again that loyalty, intelligence, and courage could guide all of them through even the most uncertain paths. As they disappeared into the soft glow of twilight, the plains seemed to sigh with contentment, as though acknowledging the transformation that had taken place. 3 lives, once separate and uncertain, were now intertwined in a bond that could not be broken. And as night fell, Jake, Ayanna, and Shadow faced the future together, stronger, wiser, and forever changed by the journey they had shared. The plains would always be wild and unpredictable, but for the first time, all 3 of them felt truly at home. Together they had discovered not only safety and survival, but trust, courage, and the life-changing power of connection.